We're here for our community development meeting. It is April 6, 2023. The time is 9 a.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. In attendance are Commissioners Brooks, Matari, and Duncan. Are there any changes to the agenda besides the one that I have? Just the one I have. Okay, fantastic. So,
Can I?
yes.
Some people can't hear. Can they turn that up a little?
Sure. Can you turn up the volume in the room? Is that better? Okay, great.
Good.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a grant pre-application that needs to be approved today so that on Tuesday we can approve the application if we so desire. So this has to do with the coroner's office. So I would take a motion to amend the agenda to add the signing of the pre-application. Jody, is that okay to have that? How do you want it worded, Pat?
Signing of.
So it's a pre-application. The application's due by April 18th. So if we don't sign this today, then we can't address it on April 11th for it to be approved in time.
And what's it for?
It is for a grant for the coroner's office.
To do what?
That I don't know. Jody, do you know?
Sure. Yes, it's a medical examiner coroner accreditation grant under the Office of Justice and Bureau of Justice Assistance.
Yep. So it's
Go ahead. Oh, I beg your pardon. It's a two-step process. So the first step of the submission is the two documents that Leslie's referring to. One is an SF-424, which just means that we're providing them the name of our entity, our tax ID number, and those types of things. And then the second is a disclosure for lobbying activities, saying that we do not support or fund lobbying activities. So those are the two documents for today for seeking board approval to submit today to meet the deadline of the 11th on Tuesday. We'll bring it forward again on Tuesday for ratification.
Okay.
I think the reason, excuse me, Pat Braden, Civil Deputy Prosecutor for the record, I think the reasons stated by Chair Duncan and by Ms. Beasy are sufficient to, constitute emergencies, to move ahead with this, and then, it would be ratified on Tuesday as well during the business meeting. So I'm comfortable with going forward at this point.
Okay. Thank you. I'll try to just do this.
You could just say for the
motion
reasons previously stated.
Oh, okay. So I move that we add to our agenda the signing of the SF-424 documents because of a deadline in time and what was stated earlier.
I second the motion.
Bill Brooks.
Aye.
Commissioner Matari.
Aye.
Chair Duncan.
Aye, and we'll handle that after our deliberations during our business section. So, okay, I do not have any opening remarks today, and I will poll for conflicts of interest for our deliberation item.
None.
I have a potential, I don't know, it's not going to influence how I vote. But I used to work at a group youth home at the University of Illinois as a house parent. And I did that, a relief house parent on weekends.
Okay. I have one that is not a conflict, but I will acknowledge my relationship with the applicant's representative, Jennifer Scott. So longtime friend of the family's, but that won't also affect my viewing of what's before me. So, okay, with that, we will go ahead to our deliberation item, which is CUP 22-0008, Living Water Youth Ranch. And Vlad, are you going to lead us in this?
That is correct. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Speak up.
Speak up, Dan.
Okay, I'll do my best. Good morning. For the record, Vlad Finkel with Kootenai County Community Development. Before I start with the details of this request, if the board doesn't mind, I'd like to address a number of comments that were brought up after the hearing examiner had submitted their recommendation last week. We have had the public call and email us with questions about the process and how the county will move forward with a final decision and what are some of the options for the public as well as the applicant. I'd like to remind the board as well as the public that the decision that will be made today, whether it is an approval or denial of their request, either the applicant or any members of the public have the right under the Kootenai County Land Use and Development Code under Section 8.5 of our code, as well as state law, to request a reconsideration of the board's final decision today. The applicant or the public have 14 days after the order of decision has been signed to request in writing a request for reconsideration. That reconsideration request cannot, or the hearing itself cannot be denied by the board. Staff is automatically obligated to notice for a public hearing on their reconsideration request and move that forward. If I misspoke, Mr. Braden can correct me on that matter. Moving forward, this has been quite a contentious project. There is a lot of information in the record and in the HE recommendation that has been put together from the original recommendation by staff. Commissioners, you're welcome to ask me any questions. Typically for deliberations, we do just a quick overview. But if necessary, I can go into the details of this application. What is your pleasure?
I wouldn't mind the details.
Okay, you're good with that? So has the applicant not requested a public hearing before the commissioners then?
Thank you for that question, Chair Duncan. I have personally made contact via email as well as tried by phone and finally got a response from Ms. Scott that she is not interested in requesting public hearing. Whether that is because she no longer wants to pursue this or she may request a reconsideration after the board's decision, that's totally speculation. I don't know.
Sure.
But as of today, there has not been a formal request.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Proceed.
Okay, so this matter came to staff's attention last summer. We had a pre-application as well as a submittal for what's called a Living Water Youth Ranch, a residential care facility for troubled youth or youth at risk. You
can sit at the table.
The project site is located north of I-90 between Wolf Lodge Bay and 4th of July Pass. The primary access to the subject property is off of Alder Creek Road, which is a public road maintained by the East Side Highway District. The subject parcel is 73 acres in size. However, in the application, the applicant stated that they would utilize approximately 52 acres of the subject property for the proposed use, and 20 acres would be set aside in the future, or may be set aside in the future, to exercise the large lot exemption option in our code to set that 20 acres aside for another residential use. So while this is currently one parcel, at some point 20 acres may be removed through the exemption review process. As you can see, the subject property is in a very remote area. These are some very crude photos from Google Earth, but it kind of gives you a general overview of the physical conditions of the site. There is significant amount of vegetation at the top of the bench, and then it is a very steep slope all the way to I-90. This is another aerial / 3D overview of the property looking west towards Kellogg. Going back, the property or the applicant is contemplating developing their facility at the top of the bench. That would be significantly far away from the primary access, Alder Creek Road, but then it would also be away from this cliff that heads down to I-90. The zoning is rural, and the comp plan designation is resource recreation. It also has country comp plan designation to the north, and it has scenic to the west. I believe the parcels to the west are all state land. It's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's under the ownership of Idaho Department of Lands.
Glad, how close are the closest residential?
That is a good question, Commissioner Brooks. I believe the closest residence is in this location. I think it's a little over 1,000 feet. If need be, I can double check.
Okay, that's okay, Vlad. I see it now, I just couldn't see it up on the,
I don't have
It's good.
an exact distance, but there are residences. It appears to be, I'd like to correct myself. I stated at the last hearing before the hearing examiner that the residential development is very sparse. I'd like to correct myself. There are a number of residences in the area. It's just they're not very visible due to the topographical features as well as vegetation and forested timberland conditions in the area. This is the proposed layout of the facility. There would be the primary main building that would be approximately 14,000 square feet. The applicant intends to house as many as 24 residents, youth that would be ranging from the age of 12 to 17. There would be 12 boys and 12 girls. They would have up to as many as 15 staff members working at that facility at any given time. They would actually have some cabins for members of their staff team to stay overnight, and depending on weather conditions and so on. They would actually have other outdoor activities on site, including a horse corral and then a field where the kids would be in recreational activities. And of course, as I mentioned, the southern portion of the property at some point can be removed or can be split out of this 73-acre parcel to become its own parcel for primary residential use. These are some of the photos of the property. There is an existing creek on the property. There are, there's a meadow, and then there's quite a bit of vegetation. So there's different types of terrain as well as vegetation on site, but it does have more of a remote feel. I have visited the property on more than 3 different occasions. And it's a really nice piece of property, but it is somewhat remote. During the agency comment period, we did solicit comments from various agencies that are listed on the slide here. A majority of the agencies did not express any concerns. They just had a number of recommendations or requirements that typically staff submits as conditions of approval in the staff report. But I do want to make it very clear that during the first public comment period, staff, and I'll take the heat for that, failed to contact the sheriff's office. We did receive a comment after the staff report was initially issued to the hearing examiner in October of last year, with concerns about the remote location, delayed response time, and accessibility in the winter months. We did have Captain Deek testify on record that they were not in support of the application at the October 20th hearing that was held before our hearing examiner. At that hearing, the applicant requested that due to the overwhelming amount of opposition, at that time, I believe we received over 100 comments in opposition of the request, that the project be remanded back to community development for further review and analysis of all the issues that were brought up by the public, including compatibility, safety concerns, and other features that I will be discussing. But there were 2 public hearings conducted on this matter, which is very unique. Like I said, we had almost 100 comments. A number of concerns were related to increase in vehicular traffic, inadequate security, runways, trespass, vandalism, property crime, impassable road conditions in the winter months, impact to groundwater supply, limited cellular coverage in case of emergency, remote location, and delayed emergency response time. One of the major issues, or sort of the overarching concern that the members of the public raised at the first hearing that was conducted on October 20th as well as on March 16th of this year, was the security concerns and breach of physical security on site. That is because there was significant amount or extensive amount of communication between staff and the applicant as it relates to the occupancy designation of the proposed main structure. The applicant, based on what they submitted, and as part of a conditional use permit application, they mean the applicant, are not obligated, and nowhere in the code does it state that they have to have a set of architectural and engineering drawings for the proposed structure that's on site. This is merely a conceptual request that will be further reviewed if the application is approved at the time of building permit application as well as site disturbance permit application. That said, during the review process, we did solicit comments from our building division official, and the concerns that were brought up at the beginning or during the agency comment period were that it was unclear on what the classification of the structure itself, not the use, but the classification and occupancy classification of the use itself should be. The building official was leaning towards an institutional type of facility, meaning that there would be no self-preservation. And that's a term of art that's typically used for building officials. Self-preservation implies that folks can freely, or the residents can freely move throughout the facility and exit and enter the facility at will. Based on what the applicant proposed, the security measures that they were contemplating would imply that they would have no self-preservation, meaning that they would be either locked in or somehow kept within the facility or in their room without the ability to have self-preservation or leave the site, or leave the building. The building official at the time concluded that that would be in line with an institutional type of facility like a corrections facility or some other institution where folks could not freely roam through the building or leave the building itself. The applicant was not comfortable, if that's the right word we want to use, or pleased with that classification, and then they decided to change or revise their proposal to have self-preservation, meaning that the level of security that they would promote or have on site would include security cameras, drones, staff, and other measures that would not preclude self-preservation. And I would.
Does this building have sprinklers in it?
This building?
No, the building they're proposing have a sprinkler system.
That's a good question. That is a question related to the fire safety measures. I don't know the specific answer to that, but as I understand, buildings that are over 12,000 square feet, and that's typically the requirement for storage buildings, but I'm assuming because this is a residential use, which would be more intense, the likelihood of sprinkler system being in place is very high. I can't confirm that, but it's very high that sprinkler systems would be required, as well as fire hydrants and other measures for fire suppression. But going back to security measures, if the board still wants to hear that, I want to be very clear that the applicant did not wish to have the facility be considered an institution, and they wanted to have that it be considered the occupancy being residential use with self-preservation. That in itself raised a lot of eyebrows from the community, sheriff's office, as well as staff. One of the things that, or one of the points that we made in our initial staff report is if the hearing examiner were to recommend denial but the board wanted to approve it, or if the hearing examiner wanted to approve the request as well as the board, there were a set of conditions of approval that we were proposing, including security measures such as a security fence, the type of individuals that they could accept, and a log of all the individuals that they would have on site. So these were some of the concerns that were raised, of course, at the first public hearing. During the second public comment period, we received additional comments. I think there were a total of 580 comments on this application. There were a total of additional 98 comments in support, 371 comments in opposition, 3 comments with no position, and then 1 comment that was neutral. The concerns were very similar: increase in vehicular traffic, inadequate security measures, runaways, trespass, vandalism, property crimes, impact to groundwater supply, and then of course the sheriff's office. The applicant met with the sheriff, I believe, in January of this year to discuss the comments that they brought forward in October of last year to try to address or provide mitigation so that the sheriff's office would change their position. The sheriff's office came back and stated on record that their position has not changed. They stick by their original comments that were made in October of last year. Staff analysis during the first public comment period and first public hearing from the hearing examiner, as well as the second public comment period, were very similar. We had concerns related to the compatibility of the proposed use with the existing homes and businesses in the area. We had concerns with the applicant being able to adequately mitigate environmental, social, and economic impacts. And our concern was the fact that the sheriff's office was unable to, they had concerns and they could not definitively state that they could provide adequate services to this facility. We feel that that was one of the main factors for not meeting the findings of fact for adequate services as it relates to this proposed facility. Moreover, we did have concerns with the comp plan analysis. The primary purpose of the resource recreation designation is to promote commercially viable and productive resource cultivation and extraction of agriculture, timber production, and surface mining. And then there's a level of detail as to the type of agricultural pursuits that may be suited for this type of resource recreation designation. Consequently, we concluded that it is unclear that the proposed residential care facility comports with the resource recreation designation. While there are components of the use that include recreation for the residents, the use itself is not primarily recreational. One of the reasons, or one of the factors that the applicant had raised at both hearings was the fact that they intentionally were seeking a remote site where they could have the feel of a very outdoor space with a wilderness component environment for the treatment of the kids that were in trouble with the law or insubordination and other factors that play into at youth risk type of designation. So they made it very clear at both hearings that this was not some this was not a decision that was just arbitrary or they picked the first site. They made it very clear that they chose the site because of its remote location and because of its environmental conditions and physical features that would be benefit to their residents in terms of treatment. Staff's recommendation following March 16th hearing was that the proposal is not compatible with the existing homes, businesses, and neighborhoods and with the natural characteristics of the area. The proposal does not adequately address site constraints and or hazards, and does not adequately mitigate any negative environmental, social, and economic impacts. Services and facilities for the proposal are not available and adequate. The proposal will not meet the duly adopted requirements of other agencies with jurisdiction. The proposal is in conflict with the comprehensive plan. I may elaborate on any other details of this request if you would like, but at this point, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, questions for Vlad?
No questions. Thank you.
Bill?
Are there any plans for a security fence?
Commissioner Brooks, the code does have a requirement that there be a what's called an adequate fence. That's the way it's phrased in our code. There is a component about adequate fence. Staff, with the concerns that I can address if you'd like, regarding this actually moving forward without going through a conditional use permit process, as multiple primary uses on site. If you want, I can give you that level of detail as well. But we do have a number of security measures that we proposed as conditions of approval if the board chooses to approve it. There should be a security fence around the primary building on site. In the event the facility operator becomes aware of the resident leaving the facility, staff shall contact Kootenai County Sheriff's Office immediately. And the last condition that we felt was more or less appropriate to mitigate the concerns raised by the public as to the types of children residents that would reside on site with respect to some of the criminal activity or issues that they may have had with law enforcement, was a condition of approval 8.20 that states the facility shall not accept any residents with a juvenile conviction other than a status offense. The applicant shall maintain a record of all residents within the facility and make it available to Kootenai County Community Development at all times. And what we mean by that is we don't necessarily want to know, who each individual is. That could be redacted. We just want to understand that the type of individuals that would be residing at the facility would conform with the with conditional approval 8.20.
So essentially, you're allowing only unadjudicated minors here. Is that correct?
Commissioner Brooks, I'd like to point out on record, I'm not an attorney, nor do I pretend to be one, but I would like to have Mr.
We have an
Braden
attorney
elaborate.
here.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say I am, and yes, that would be correct. A status offense would be like a runaway.
Right.
Or something that would be legal for an adult but not legal for a juvenile, and is not considered a criminal offense.
Good, thank you.
And I'd like to add that the applicant at the last hearing held on March 16th objected to that conditional approval. We asked for them to clarify if the board or the hearing examiner were willing to approve this, what sideboards would they like to place on the type of children that would be accepted into this facility. They have made it very clear they have no intention of taking in felons or individuals that would pose high risk. But they did not elaborate on the sideboards that would try to mitigate the type of children that would be taken in. If the board is inclined to change the hearing examiner's recommendation or go against it and approve the request, they have the discretion to either implement this condition or modify it as necessary.
So,
Go ahead.
well, if we go against the hearing examiner's recommendation, don't we have to have another public hearing?
No, you do not.
Not on a conditional.
Oh, conditional use permit.
Conditional use permit.
Gotcha.
Only on a zone change.
Gotcha. Okay.
But there are-
It would be an option, but it would not be required.
Sure.
And if the board wants, I can elaborate on the possibility of this type of facility moving forward without a conditional use permit, if that's something that the board is interested in.
I read it in
No.
the file, so.
No, thank you.
So then I would ask, are we ready to do deliberations, or is there more time needed?
I'm ready.
Okay,
Yes.
good. All right. Who wants to start?
Well, I'm in favor of the hearing examiner and denying it.
Okay.
As I said, I used to work at one of these places. I believe in places like this. I really do. I think this is a good project. I don't think it's thoroughly thought out, and I think it's in the wrong location. So I would be inclined to vote against it also.
I think that had, some of these issues been able to be better addressed, then, it'd be a different conversation. But I think at this time, there's too many things to overcome at this point. So as much as I think the project would be a good one, there's too many things that that have not been adequately addressed at this point. So, and once again, I look at conditional use permits as the people weigh in, and that weight means something. Where if it's a different by right or by use, then that's something different. But conditional use permit is where the people get to speak. So, once again, I think it's a great project, just not without addressing some of the other issues. So I would take a motion.
Commissioners, if you don't mind, in your motion, if it's a denial, if you could give some direction for the applicant to potentially gain approval, I think that's a necessity that you need to make in your motion.
Yeah, it's certainly required in the order of decision, and I think it would be helpful to include, I mean, I've heard some things already in deliberations, but, if you were to include some things in the motion, that would be beneficial, I think.
Okay. You want to try to tackle that, or?
Well, what would those things be?
Well-
Right to reconsideration, is that what you're talking about?
That they
No,
can
not
they can
necessarily.
appeal?
Just If they were to come back with a new application, then, what are some of the things that weren't adequately addressed here, that they would want to focus on
Can
in
we
the subsequent application?
can we just refer to the hearing examiner's?
You could do that,
record?
yes.
Okay.
I move that we deny CUP 22-0008 at the Living Water Youth Ranch based upon the hearing examiner's information presented today, and that if they want to reapply for the conditional use permit, they must address those issues.
I second the motion.
Bill Brooks.
Aye.
Commissioner Matari.
Aye.
Chair Duncan.
Aye. All right, CUP 22-0008 has been denied, and now we can move on to our business
Regular
section.
business meeting. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, and the only thing is our emergency edition of the signing of these documents. And once again, it's for the accreditation of our coroner's office. And once they obtain official accreditation, then they are going to be eligible for many more grant programs. So, and once again, this is only approval of these initial documents. On Tuesday, we will have an opportunity to address the actual grant application, and at that time, we can make a decision. So this is not obligating us to anything, and we'll be able to approve or deny the grant on Tuesday.
Yeah, I move that we go ahead and sign these documents so that we can get further into the process.
Thank
I
you.
think it's important.
I second the motion.
Bill Brooks.
Aye.
Commissioner Matari.
Aye.
Chair Duncan.
Aye. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and it is 9:34, meeting adjourned.